Lesson 4: Window Scene and Hierarchy. In this lesson, we will focus in the windows of scene and hierarchy. The first is the most important Unity window, since in it you will create all the levels that you will use in your games. The second is a simplified and orderly version of the first. Go for it. We will delve into the two most important windows that you will be using. In the scene window is where we will visually create our game. Up to the left, we have the tools for transformations that will allow us to navigate and interact with the objects of the scene. These tools have shortcuts from the keyboard to use them more easily. The keys are Q, W, E, R, T, and Y. The hand or hand tool allows us to move around the scene clicking and dragging, although normally you will not use it since there are several shortcuts to use while using another transformation tool. For example, imagine that we are using the Move tool and you want to move the camera from the scene. Press the button in the middle of the mouse, or Alt plus click, so you will use the hand tool as if you had it selected, but without changing the tool. The Move tool is the one I have most activated. Since the visual guide you have indicates me very well what object I have selected. With this visual guide you can move the object as you want, both freely and fixed to an axis. The x-axis for the red arrow, and the y-axis for the green arrow. Even if you try to move the mouse on the other hand, it will only move on the selected axis. The tool Rotate or Rotate allows us, as the name indicates, to rotate an object from right to left, using visual guides. You will have to use the external visual guide to rotate the object. You can always go back with Command plus Z or Control plus Z. The Scale or Scale, Transform or Enlarge tool. Like the Move tool, it allows us through visual guides, scale or modify the selected object. The entire object, or only on one axis, x-axis or y-axis. Then we will see the axis more in depth. And the last two tools are the Rect tool and this new tool that is all together. Both are very similar. With Rect you can do the same thing I just taught you, move, scale, or rotate. And with the last tool, you can do exactly the same. This goes to your liking. When you get used to using one or the other, you will feel more comfortable. And in the end, you will use the keyboard to activate it, using it as necessary. Next to this transformation toolbar, we found two buttons that will allow us to select how the transformations will be carried out about the selected object or objects. The first button will allow us to choose if we want to apply the transformations on the object pivot, or about the center of the object. What I mean by this, it may be difficult to understand with a single object, so we will select two to see it in action. If I select the enemy and the player, for example, Chris, and with Command pressed, I select Bronson. If you see, the guide or the visual guide has been placed in the middle of the two. When moving, we will move the two together, but if you select, for example, Rotate with the center button selected, the two objects will rotate from the center of the selection. However, if I change to Pivot, you will realize that both objects will rotate on their pivots, which in this case is the center of the sprite. If I change to Center again, the selection will rotate, the center of the selection. The following tool will allow us to select if the rotation transformations on an object, they will be in global, or world, or local mode. Imagine that a weapon object is inside an enemy object. With local mode, which is what will normally be selected, you can apply the transformations to that same object, in this case the weapon. Respect to his father, instead of respect to the world itself. When you move a weapon inside an object, you usually want to be positioned with respect to that parent object. They will understand it better in the future when they use it. But with this configuration, it will go quite well for your day-to-day. Before continuing, I want you to understand a very important thing, and is that Unity is a 3D gaming tool, to which after its creation, the possibility of making 2D games was added. If you see this button here that is activated, because when I created this project, I told him it would be a 2D project and activated automatically. But if we deactivate it, you will see the reality, which is nothing more than Unity is a 3D environment in which we can position objects on a new axis. That is the depth. When you select 3D mode, if you realize, up here on the right, you will see a gizmo which teaches you the axes. In this case the X, the Y, and the new axis that is not when it is in 2D mode, which is the Z. Why? Because in 2D mode, we are ignoring the depth. What you see here is a scene from our game Crossing Souls, which was created many years ago. And at that time, Unity's 2D tools, they were less advanced, and we had to do some deep tricks. They were not easy to do without the use of depth. I will teach you later how to make depth effects without the Z-axis. Let's go back to 2D mode. You won't use 3D, but I want you to understand that it's important. If you want to get the most out of this tool, understand how it works. Inside the scene window, we have a series of very useful buttons, although its use is usually reduced. Let's go over them quickly. The first is the draw mode, and allow us to see the scene differently, or have very useful information about the scene. This type of drawing mode is usually more useful in more advanced games, or 3D. We are not using complicated shaders, neither mipmaps nor anything. You're starting at Unity. You don't need to know anything. Leaving it on shaded is fine. The next button is lighting. Activates and deactivates the dynamic lighting of the scene. Normally a 2D game is very inspired or limited for his art direction, and the sprites will come already lit and painted, as they have to appear in the game, so we're not going to make use of dynamic lighting. Therefore this token has no effect. The next button allows to activate and deactivate the sounds in the scene without having to give play to listen to them. Since we have no sound, there will be no difference. But when you have a complex scene and have sounds activated, if the camera approaches, you will hear it. The next button allows to activate or deactivate different layers of game rendering in the scene window. Normally it will allow you to focus on one of those layers or improve performance, since this scene has a lot of load when you create more complex games. The next button is that of the camera and will allow us to modify the game camera a bit, the one we use in the scene, but the one we use as the main window of our stage. Even so, I would leave it with the default settings. Since it's usually pretty good, you don't need to put it your way, but if it bothers you, you play with these values. And perhaps the most important button is the Gizmos button, which allows to activate or deactivate different visual guides about active components in the scene. It allows us, for example, to create or activate 3D visual components, which will move or enlarge depending on how far that are on the screen. I like it in 2D, since having too much. This scene, for example, is very simple, but in the future we will have many components, and having them in 3D is not very useful. You can also enable or disable different components, for example particles, sounds, and more. You will be doing little by little. Finally, there is a search box which allows you to search for a name by its object. If you realize I'm looking for Chris, it will put everything in gray, and it will only illuminate the object I am looking for. As you will see, the scene window is closely linked to the hierarchy window, and here are the objects that are already inside a scene, but in an orderly manner. Although you can click on any object within the scene window. This selection is very irregular and will not give you the object you are looking for, since some are in front of others, and the click may not know what you were looking for. To do this, get used to using the hierarchy window and select the object you are looking for, if you want to center the stage camera. In the object you have selected, you can do it in two ways. One is to double-click on the object, and the other is to click on the object, and with the mouse over the scene window press F. Yes, for example, you want the camera to focus on more than one element. You can select them by pressing Ctrl, and with the mouse over the scene window press F. The camera will attempt to frame all selected objects to the maximum. From the hierarchy window, this is where you can add new objects to the stage. Create or delete them. Above you will see the Create button to create the most basic shapes, although you can also do it with a right-click on the hierarchy window, anywhere. It is the same menu and will allow you to create most basic Unity objects. We will see later. Keep in mind that when you create a zero object, it comes with a base component that is the transform component, which indicates the position, rotation, and scale of this object in the scene. When we use the transformation tools mentioned above, what we are doing is changing these values. within its transform component. Remember that you can create objects and nest them inside another. The object higher in the hierarchy is known as the parent and child to the innermost object. One thing you have to keep in mind is that when an object is the child of another parent object, your transform will show its position on the parent object. What does this mean? Imagine that I selected the parent object and took it to position 10, 10, 0. Remember that in 2D games we don't worry about the z-axis or depth. If we go to the child object and set it to 0, 0, we are saying that the child object, it is right in the center of its parent object. However, if I move it 5 to the right and 5 up, this object, at the global level of the scene, it really is in position 15, 15. 10, 10 of his father plus 5, 5 of himself with respect to his father. You may not understand it now, but we will work later, and you will see that it is very simple. The same will happen when you do any transformation. About the parent object. If you rotate or scale a parent object, the child object will also have that rotation. Do not forget this. This window also has, like Scene, of a search box that will allow you search for objects by name. You are already noticing the possibilities that Unity offers you. What is not so complex? In the next lesson, we will see the game and inspector windows.